To wrap up this unit, we're going to look at what motivated our whole chapter in the first place, way back at the beginning slides where we looked at our loan calculator and wished that we could have a GUI interface for it. So at long last, we're finally going to implement that GUI version of our loan calculator. As such, it uses our loan class, which I've got in here exactly the way we had it way back in chapter 10, no changes. We're going to utilize that loan class inside of our GUI demo that we put together here. Well, we have the usual imports that you have now come to expect that we're going to need for this, so they are all there. And you can see that our demo extends application as always, so that's usual. And then we've got our override of the start method, which is again usual. We've added a whole bunch of private data members here that we should talk about. Most of them are text field, but there is a single button that we've called button calculate, and that's going to set the wheels in motion so that when we click it, it will actually go ahead and compute everything it needs to compute about the loan and output the final results to us. Each of the pieces of information that we would have been prompted for last time we saw this loan class, instead of being prompted for them, we're simply going to be provided text fields to type them into. So as you can see, we have a whole bunch of different text fields that have been defined here. And the first is they all start with TF using the convention that was introduced by the author earlier. And we have annual interest rate, number of years, loan amount, monthly payment, total payment, all borrowed from the original loan class. However, only 3 of these were input, and that was annual interest rate, number of years, and loan amount. The other 2 were the results of output that was generated. Nevertheless, they're all text fields. It's just that we're going to make sure that some of them can't be changed and some of them can be changed. In other words, some will be editable while others will not be allowed to be edited. A convenient layout pane to use for this interface would be a grid pane. Remember, the grid pane has particular rows and columns that we can put things into. Let's just kind of scan down our grid pane in looking at the indices. So we have 0, 0, 1, 0, and so on. Let's find the biggest row and biggest column index that we can find. So it only goes to a 1 here, and it only goes to a 5 here. So there's going to be 2 different columns labeled 0 and 1, and there's going to be 6 different rows labeled 0 through 5. So we can know that just by checking for those maximum row and column indices. The items that we're going to put into our grid consist of labels and text fields. The labels are for the text fields. So for the example, the text field that we call annual interest rate, we're going to provide a label for it that says annual interest rate colon. And likewise, we'll provide an appropriate label for every one of these text fields. Now let's look at all the individual indices for our grid pane and see if there's any that are missing, any combinations that are missing. We have 6 rows and 2 columns. There should be potentially 12, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 items. So obviously there's going to be a blank spot somewhere in our grid pane. And if you take the time and trouble to look at all those indices, you'll notice there is no 0, 5. There's a 1, 5 down at the bottom, but no 0, 5. So that means that spot, 0, 5, in our grid array is going to be empty. That looks like the place where the same row where the calculate button occurs. And that kind of makes sense because it's not going to have a label apart from the label that's right on it that says calculate. I suppose it's also noteworthy that all of our text fields are named. We've actually given them names up at the top in this section that I've highlighted here. But you'll notice that the labels are all anonymous labels. We simply put right in here new label and give it the label, and then we give the coordinates of where to add it, but it's added as an anonymous label. There's no name for any of these labels, and that's because once we put them in the grid pane, we have no further use for them. We don't need to talk about them or refer to them or access them, so there's no need to give them a name, which is why they appear as anonymous labels. But on the other hand, the text fields, we do want to deal with them, so we give them names for that reason. So continuing along to look at the rest of the code, let's take a look at where we set up our listener. We only have one actual action that can occur, and that's clicking the calculate button on our loan calculator. And so what we're going to have is a set action method for that calculator button, and we're using the lambda notation, you'll notice here. So we say E arrow calculate loan payment, indicating that this is going to be the method that's going to execute whenever that button gets pressed. I'll just clean up this little bit of code at the bottom that we don't need to simplify things. So what do we have left then? Well, some of the stuff is the usual things that you're used to seeing. We're going to have a scene that we drop our grid pane in that we've produced, and the scene is going to be 400 by 250. We're going to title the stage appropriately, drop the scene in the stage, and show the stage as always. So we're now going to focus on the event handler. Before we leave this screen though, notice that we have, just to emphasize again, we've defined the handler by saying button calculate dot set on action E arrow calculate loan payment. So calculate loan payment is the thing that we need to look at carefully next. So here we are looking at the calculate loan payment method. We've declared a double called interest, which is a double dot parse double text field annual interest rate dot get text. So what this is doing here is it gets the text from our text field called annual interest rate, and it parses it as a double, because everything that comes from a text field at this point is just going to be a string. It doesn't matter if it's a string that happens to contain only digits or a decimal point in some digits or something else. It's always just a string. So that's why we need to use the parse double method of the double class to get that into a regular numeric value so that we can use it in our calculations. And the final value we get is assigned to the variable interest, which is declared to be double. We do the same technique to get the year, except this time it's a parse int that we do because it's an integer value. And and we also get the loan amount, which is a double, using the same technique as we did for the interest. So we've parsed out interest as a double, loan as an amount as a double, and we've parsed out year as an integer. So we've got those all from the text fields now. So every time you click the button, this process is gone through, and we get whatever fresh values of texts happen to be sitting in each of those text fields, and we parse them out appropriately to get the numeric equivalents. Once we have those numbers, then we can go ahead and do the calculation of the monthly payment and the total payment. So here's where we actually create a loan object, and we pass it the values that came from those text fields converted to integers and loan doubles as they should be. So we have interest, year, and loan amount. We now have a loan object that exists, which now we can go ahead and do a calculation on. We simply do that by providing the same code that we did before to calculate these things, but we're going to sort of kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone here. What we're going to do is we're going to get monthly payment from our loan class. So that's where the actual calculation takes place. And then in this section, what we're doing is merely producing a string using the format method that we learned about earlier. We're giving a format of a $, which will physically appear, and then a %, which indicates formatting for a double, in this case of 0.2f. This means we don't care how many places are before the decimal, but we want precisely 2 places to be displayed after the decimal, because it's a dollar amount. So we have dollars and cents would only be 2 digits worth of information. And we use the same format here for the total payment as well as the monthly payment. So the calculations again are actually being done by the code in the loan class, and what we're doing here is simply formatting that result as a string, because we can only put strings in text fields, and then we're going ahead and dropping them in the appropriate text field by simply saying the name of the text field dot set text. Now before we actually run the demo, let's just go back to a couple of lines that I suggested would be there but we never actually looked at. This is right here where the default for text fields is editable, but notice what we've done in the case of the monthly payment and total payment. This is output information. It ought not to be something that the user has the ability to edit. The other text fields, of course, are editable because they function as input values for us to get, as you saw in the code. But these two things are output only. That is the monthly payment text field and the total payment text field. So you can see what we've done here is we've overridden the default by saying tf monthly payment dot set editable false, and that's what makes it not editable. And I'll demonstrate that when we actually run this, how we can click and then type text in the other fields, but these two fields we will not be able to enter anything into or change what's there. So I think we're ready to go ahead and run the demonstration now. So let me click on the run button, and here we go. So before I do anything, let me confirm for you that these two fields at the bottom are not editable text fields. So if I click on them, first of all, you'll notice you do not even see a cursor appear, whereas if I click up here, you do get a cursor and the box is highlighted. Here the box gets highlighted indicating it's been selected, but no cursor appears, and the same is true with this. If I attempt to type some things from the keyboard, nothing happens. Whereas up here I can type whatever I want, and if I leave a non-numeric string in there, I'm going to be in trouble. We'll be talking about how to deal with that, or maybe we already talked about how to deal with that in the exceptions chapter that we looked at. So you can apply some of that knowledge in figuring out what you would do in case of somebody not entering an appropriate value in this field. But for now, we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and enter valid, correct information in here. So let's make the annual interest rate 1%, and the number of years, let's make that 10 years. And let's say the loan is for a measly $100, and let's see what happens. So of course we don't see anything in the monthly payment or total payment. We still can't edit them, as we should not be able to. But now when I calculate on the calculate button, the values that are sitting in these fields will be read in, parsed through, assigned to our variables, and then the payment and monthly payment and total payment calculations will take place, and we'll get results in these two fields. So let's try that. Well, there you go. So that $100 loan is going to cost you 88 cents per month for 10 years, and at the end of the day you would have paid a total of $100 plus $5.12 worth of interest. So there you have it, our nice GUI version of our loan calculator. Well, just to finish off, let's try something horrible like entering a string here just to see what's going to happen. Well, as you can't see it, but I can. Let me expand the screen and show you what horrible thing happened as a result of what I just did. Well, you'll notice a whole bunch of bad stuff happened down here at the bottom of the screen. Let me just clear that up for you and show you that again. So let's clear this and bring the GUI back up. In all probability it's terminated, but let's just try clicking to see what happens anyway. No, it actually is still running. Even though there's an error, it did not terminate. It still continues to run and we can still use it. But of course, until we fix this problem right here that says blat, it's going to do all of this horrible stuff every time we run it. So let's clear that off again. Bring the GUI back up, and this time let's put in something nice like 2% and calculate. And now of course we don't get all that trouble. So that actually completes this unit of our course.